Hello and welcome to another ESET East Africa technical video. Today we're going to be covering Pulseway, our remote monitoring and management system. On my screen at the moment there's a couple of things that you should be able to see. The first thing that I'm going to cover is actually the agent that would be installed on every machine. So this little window over here is the agent configuration tool. Obviously it's already configured for the laptop that I'm running this from. And I'm basically using a particular account to authenticate my agent against our server, which is the window sitting in the background. And then I've effectively delegated access to my user that I use to log into the system from this particular account. So this account I'm only using to authenticate my agents, and then I delegate access to the relevant technical individual inside our organization. Because there is a software as a service version available for Pulseway, I do have this option ticked to use an enterprise server because we've got a server in place in our environment. I've obviously given machine description, a host name, and a group name in order to differentiate it from the other machines in our environment. So I'm just going to cover a few things in the agent that you can do, just so that you can get an idea of what the solution is capable of. Obviously, there's all of the commands that you want to authorize for submission from any of the users that are authorized. I am monitoring physical hardware temperature sensors, and I've also enabled a couple of things, including screens view, webcam view, user chat, and optionally there's also the user support request. And what that does is it basically adds an agent, or not an agent, a icon in your system tray, so that any user sitting at their machine can effectively right-click on it and request support. When they then request support, that's actually generated as a push notification to anyone that's responsible for the alerts coming from their endpoint, for example. And that allows you to maybe look into a problem. Maybe they can log it if their machine is suddenly performing poorly, or that it's quite slow, so that anyone can then at a glance within Pulseway see what's going on for that particular machine. And then maybe inform them, listen, there's a particular process that's using the resources. They can obviously see the processes, and then they can maybe ask them to restart that, or maybe it is something else that they need to look into, and then they can obviously remote into the machine. So these are just things that you can enable or disable globally. Monitoring services is extremely straightforward. It's as simple as ticking a box. That only enables monitoring. There's a whole notification section for all of the alerts that you want generated. So you can monitor it to give you the ability to stop or restart it remotely without having to RDP into the endpoint, but this won't generate notifications. Then there's monitoring of various network interfaces. So you can effectively just tick the interface that you want to monitor, so that if it's available you can see traffic graphs and everything else. You can monitor ports, so obviously I can do both local and remote port monitoring, so that's nice to double up. So if I'm monitoring, say, port 25 on an Exchange server, it would be useful to monitor it locally from the Exchange server, but then you can also do remote monitoring from another endpoint somewhere in the network in order to ensure that remote communication to that port on that server is actually working as well. Just a basic ping response monitoring. I've got remote desktop enabled on my laptop. Monitoring scheduled tasks is again just ticking a box. I can monitor any of the Microsoft performance counters that might be available on a machine. So there's obviously all of the .NET and all of the other categories that are available for selection. Each category could have any number of instances and then any number of counters, and then it's just a case of ticking the box and monitoring it from there. You can also do SSL certificate and website response monitoring. So the certificate monitoring is so that you can be informed if a certificate is due to expire. The default notification, which you'll see in a moment, is about 7 days in advance. And then the website monitoring, you can monitor any site using a GET or a HEAD request, depending on your preference. You can also enable a file browser so that you can actually remotely browse files from within the apps. Then the real strength of the product actually comes from the server modules. So the server module side, it obviously has all of the various forms of integration that you might have available. It integrates into pretty much all of the Microsoft software applications. So you're sitting with integration into Active Directory and Exchange and IIS and Windows Server Update Services and SQL and Windows Server Backup. Then you obviously also support all of the major hypervisors, so VMware, Hyper-V, Xen. You also have support for the Amazon cloud as well as the Windows Azure cloud. It also integrates into our backup and disaster recovery solution, which is StorageCraft, so you can monitor the Shadow Protect backup agents from here as well. And then you can also monitor any SNMP agents from any endpoint that has the Pulseway monitor or Pulseway manager agent installed. So that means that you can monitor many network devices from all over the place, sometimes monitoring them from more than one location to see if you potentially get different responses on services being available or not. Then in terms of the notification options, obviously in this case it's a laptop, so I'm not monitoring whether or not the machine is offline. You can monitor anything that you see here, and it's just a case of then ticking the box and then setting the priority or the severity of the alert in question. So that's why there's an automatic selection for updates, because that will then automatically determine the severity of the notification based on the importance of the update. So if it's a critical update, it'll obviously be red. If it's just a normal update, it will be yellow. And if it's an optional update, it won't actually flag as an alert. You can also monitor physical disks for smart errors, so you can hopefully be informed preemptively before a hard disk fails. In my case, I'm also monitoring whether or not my firewall is being disabled, whether or not my antivirus is being disabled, or if the antivirus is reporting as out of date, for example. You can also be alerted around all sorts of performance metrics. So I'm notifying if the machine's running out of memory, if the CPU usage has sat over 90% for longer than 5 minutes. I can also monitor if a CPU has dropped below a certain threshold. So that might be useful in the event that you know a server is always quite busy. And you can set a threshold for low CPU utilization. If you're monitoring any ports from your system, then you can be informed if any of those ports have been closed or for a specific time frame. Same thing for service monitoring. So if I had ticked any of the services in the previous section, I'll have them available here, and then I can tick which of those services I want to be alerted around. Process monitoring, so that's variable conditions. So I can add process monitoring from a list of processes or by selecting the file, specifying the directory, and then I can also be notified if it's started or stopped, or if it's not responding, or if it suddenly consumed a lot of CPU resources over a specified time frame. You can also do variable ping response monitoring, so that can be quite useful for various sets of infrastructure or to international destinations, so that you can set a threshold of the maximum acceptable latency to that destination, and then obviously trigger an alert if it exceeds that. You can also do storage monitoring. So in my case, I'm monitoring based on percentage, but you can also do it in an actual megabyte value as well. And then you can also monitor for file changes. So I can monitor for a particular directory or file, and then monitor if the files are being written to, if the last access date has changed, if security settings have changed, if the file size has changed, if the name has changed, if new files have been created, or if new files have been deleted. So that's quite flexible in terms of monitoring for file changes. And then of course there's the event log monitor as well. So the event log monitor is a fairly granular area where you can effectively select any of the event logs available on your system, monitor for specific levels of events, monitor for specific keywords, or monitor for things that do not contain specific keywords or event IDs or sources. So this is especially useful if you want to monitor a specific or custom application for example, because it means that you can effectively generate alerts in the event that hardware or any other event log entry is being written by that application, so that you can immediately investigate as to why that might be happening. One of the easy use cases here would be something like an old Pastel server as a silly example. They were notorious for generating errors or running into database problems, which would obviously be written to the event log, and then you could be monitoring for specific events being generated from that application so that you can attend to it. In terms of hardware monitoring, I'm obviously monitoring my CPU if it's exceeding 70 degrees and if my hard drive exceeds 50 degrees in this case. So you can monitor any hardware temperature sensors that are available. In the event that you were running performance counter monitoring in the previous section, you can now set up alerts. So I can go and add, again, a name, select a category, select the instance, select the counters, and then set the monitoring thresholds that I want to specify. So is the counter value greater than, less than, or equal to whatever value I specify for a specific time frame, so that I can be alerted around that. Then of course there's the SSL monitoring and the website monitoring as well. So this is where you could be informed if a certificate is expired within 7 days, or if the website is not available for a specific time frame. Then of course on the server monitoring side, I've showed the various levels of integration. So this is where you configure all of the alerts around those areas. So we use it quite often in our environment. If I'm out of the office, for example, I can receive a push notification to my phone in the event that a user locked themselves out of Active Directory. So that's a very useful thing, because it means that rather than having to remotely log into our environment from my laptop by potentially VPN, running a VPN connection into the office, then establishing a remote desktop connection over to our Active Directory server, then opening up Active Directory users and computers, finding the user and then subsequently unlocking them. Obviously that's a very long process, whereas with this I can effectively unlock a user straight from my mobile phone by using the Pulseway application, or I could use my laptop, but then I can access the web interface which you see in the background, which I'm going to show in a moment, and I can effectively access it that way long before a user potentially informs us of a problem. And then of course for the Exchange monitoring, there's the monitoring if mailboxes are being mounted or dismounted, if messages have been sitting in the queue, if specific mailboxes are running out of space, and any other number of conditions. In terms of all of the hypervisor integration, whether or not it's Hyper-V or VMware or Amazon or anything like that, you can effectively be alerted if any of the virtual machines trigger a health warning. Because all of those systems like Hyper-V and VMware's vCenter obviously monitor the health of your virtual machines. So if any of those alerts get triggered, you can be informed of that, because obviously the main idea behind any remote monitoring and management system is that all of your logging events are effectively centralized into one platform. Then of course you can monitor if sites have been stopped or if application pools have stopped in IIS. You can monitor if there's any synchronization changes for WSUS with the update catalog for your Windows updates. The SQL Server monitoring is also quite granular. Aside from monitoring if queries are taking longer than a specific time frame, or if a database has grown past a certain point, or if deadlocks occur, you can actually also monitor for queries as well. So you can effectively set that you want to monitor for a query, and then you can add all of the parameters and monitor if that query is actually executing on your database. This is obviously grayed out on my laptop because I don't have SQL Server installed. Then for Windows Server backups, monitoring if a backup has failed or if a backup is completed. The same thing for our backup and DR Solution StorageCraft. I can monitor if a backup has failed, if a backup has succeeded, or if the license is due to expire, in this case within 15 days. And then there's all the other alerts that you can set up for all the other areas, like setting up variable SNMP conditions, same thing for Amazon and any alerts that you get there, and of course any alerts being generated from System Center Operations Manager on the Microsoft side as well. There's also various sets of rules. So this allows you to effectively automate a series of actions based on a number of conditions that need to be met. So I can add a logical condition over here saying at least one needs to be true. I add a value and say, let's say for example, the service status for a specific service is stopped. Then I can obviously add an action on that that says that that particular service needs to be started, for example. So I can start a task, create a task and try and start that service, or whatever the case may be. So you can effectively trigger a series of actions based on the meeting of a number of conditions. So the rules section is also quite flexible. Another important thing is that there's a very robust API available. So there's tons and tons of documentation available on the Pulseway website that enables you to effectively take any of their samples, whether it be for authentication or sending commands or reading information. Their API has very good documentation in that regard, and they've got examples on all of the ways that you can interact with the plugin from various forms of programming languages. So if I was to quickly go over here, you can see that they've got examples for all of the common programming languages ranging from Ruby to Python to Node to Perl, PHP, C, Java, and Curl. And then they basically provide examples of various sets of code that you can use, and you can effectively just copy and paste these and obviously edit them for your environment. So it's a very well documented API that is available. Moving on to the actual application, so I'm just going to log into our environment. So this is the HTML5 web app, where you will probably spend most of your time managing any of your endpoints. Obviously it shows you a summary of any of the notifications that have been generated from the system. Going to user accounts quickly. This is where I mentioned that I've delegated access. So what I've done is I'm using this account to authenticate all of my agents, and I've effectively got all of these systems enrolled with this agent. I've got a couple of associated accounts. That one over there is mine, and now you can see that I'm effectively authorized as full management and notification for all of these systems that are actually authenticated from this account. Obviously, because it's an RMM platform and technicians or administrators could be sending various commands to your servers, whether it's to restart them or to run updates or whatever the case may be, obviously an audit log is incredibly important. So I can run a report, and we can see that these are the entries from this morning when I actually logged in. Whereas if I expand that time frame to a couple of days back and then I research it again, we can see that I've made other modifications earlier in the time frame. Same thing for notifications. There's also a full notification history for all of the events that occurred in a specific time frame. So I'm just going to pull a report so we can see that there's that's actually my laptop where my D drive actually is running out of space. Then from a settings perspective, these are just basic settings for the actual web app and for the server itself. So how often things need to be checked, what email settings are used if you want to use email alerts as well, whether or not you want to customize the template that's used for notifications and mails, web application settings like the session timeout. And obviously the most important area is the systems. So we can see all of these systems in here. I'm just going to use one of our servers as a good example. So for any machine, you don't necessarily need to go and enable this because it's always enabled by default. You can see resource utilization. You can open any of these items and actually see a full graph over a time frame to see how busy that machine's CPU was, or how much RAM it was utilizing, or what the ping response time was. I can also tag machines, so that means that if I've got a range of tags for a very large environment, it just means that I can search for those endpoints a lot easier. So in this case, I've tagged this machine with server, VM, and web because it actually runs a web server as well. So if I then search for server, VM, or web, this machine would be part of the search results in question. Then of course there's the network monitoring that I've got enabled on the server. I am doing port monitoring on here, which I'm not doing on my laptop as an example. So here I'm actually doing remote port monitoring on our domain controller so that I can ensure that those services are actually available. And then of course I'm doing local TCP monitoring for some of the services that are running on this particular endpoint. Then of course there's all of the other things that you see over here. I can monitor for hard disks that are running out of space. I can monitor services, and I can stop and restart services from here. So these are services that I'm actually monitoring from this machine, and I can go and stop or restart that service remotely. I can also monitor, as I said, for SSL certificate expiry. So I'm doing that for the certificate in place on our Pulseway environment over here. I can also view any of the users that are currently logged in and I can remotely log them out if any users were authenticated on the system. I can also chat with the remote user, so that means that I can initiate a chat with someone. Maybe there's an alert that gets triggered. I see that the machine is actually using a lot of resources, and I can then initiate a chat with the user saying, hey, I noticed that something's going on. Would you like me to log in to attend to the problem, or is it okay for the moment, or something like that. I can also view the remote screen, so that's basically just a snapshot of what's on that screen at that point in time. Even though I don't have any event log notification set up, you can always view the event log for any Windows system as soon as they're authenticated on the agent. So this is always available regardless of notification settings. And then of course there's all of these server modules that I've got in place in this particular environment at the moment. I'm obviously doing IIS monitoring because Pulseway runs through IIS, so I can go into the website section and I can actually stop or restart the Pulseway IIS site from here. Same thing for all of the application pools, and I can recycle them from the system as well. I can obviously monitor the VMware environment. You'll notice that some of them are listed as only available on the mobile apps at the moment. So basically what they are doing is the HTML5 web app that you're looking at the moment is one of the newer additions to the solution. So what they're still doing is adding all of the additional integrations into the web interface, whereas in the meantime, up until they are available in here, you can use the Microsoft Metro or modern applications. So they're available for Windows 8, 8.1 and Windows 10, or using the mobile applications running on iOS and Android. Then of course there's SNMP agent that I can view from here. I can view the configuration of our ESET remote administrator, which is one of the integrations that Pulseway has. So I can monitor for a threat that was detected on any of the endpoints managed through ESET remote administrator. I can obviously manage WSUS, so I can effectively authorize updates from here, so I don't have to again log into the server and do it manually from there. And then of course I can view and install updates. So if we have a quick look, this machine has 3 updates available. I can go and I can see that they're actually all optional updates, and I can effectively tick them from here, and then I can submit the install tasks that will actually install those updates for me in the background now. And then of course most of the agents will try to update themselves automatically, so you'll see that this agent is currently up to date, and then we can see all of the commands that I can initiate against this endpoint in question. If I then quickly go over to Active Directory instead, where I've actually got Active Directory integration in place, I can go into Active Directory over here, I can go into my environment, I can search for my users, I can search for myself for example, I can select my user, and now here I can see various bits of information: when I last issued a bad password, whether or not I need to change the password on the next login, maybe the passwords have expired. Obviously my user is set to never expire in this case. I can reset passwords, I can change some policies, and I can allow a couple of things, and I can also change group membership here as well. So the idea behind all of these integrations is obviously a lot of the repetitive or time-consuming tasks that may involve logging into various different systems and opening all of these different management consoles are all centralized into one place. Whether or not it's your Active Directory or your hypervisors or your web servers or your database servers, all of that information can be centralized in one slick dashboard, and that obviously means that you can manage your infrastructure and your environment, and obviously all of the endpoints for your users a lot more effectively. Then they're also adding some additional integrations, so if you're using it, you can also integrate into Slack, and that'll effectively allow you to push all of the notifications that are originating for your environment into your Slack messaging system. So that might be useful, so that if there's a lot of people that might not need to receive alerts from your monitoring system, but you do want to enable them to have visibility on something that might be down, which is affecting them or your customers, then you can obviously centralize that into your messaging system. Then there's a few other management apps available. There is the Pulseway dashboard, which is this application over here. So you can maybe put this up on a big screen in the office for your technicians or for the rest of the users, whatever you prefer. And you can obviously see that there's a very good indication of the status across your environment and any alerts that might have been triggered. So that's quite useful in a large environment, so you can always have a quick glance at what's going on, and obviously any current or pending alerts will then scroll across the bottom banner, kind of like a news site, for example. Then there's also the remote desktop tool. So we're waiting earnestly for this to be available from the mobile applications as well. So for the moment it's only available as a Windows application, and then I can effectively select any particular endpoint that has the agent installed. The ones that are grayed out are either machines that don't have the remote desktop facility enabled, or they are Linux machines which obviously don't support remote desktop and therefore are grayed out. So that one doesn't have it enabled, whereas these are actually Linux servers, and that one as well. So I can effectively select any machine, double click it, see any sessions that are running, start the remote desktop session, that opens up. And then I can immediately start remotely managing that endpoint. So that's kind of like a team viewer or something like that. Right, so I hope that was an informative video. Obviously, with all of our content, if you have any questions, please post them. If you have any suggestions for improving the content, please let us know. Until next time, thank you.